glass slipped from the Duke of Calverton's hand and shattered on the marble floor. Every head in the ballroom turned. Champagne spread in a slow, golden puddle around his polished boots, but he did not move. He did not blink. He did not breathe. His eyes were locked on the far end of the grand hall, where the candlelight fell like warm rain over a woman in ivory and gold, spinning in the arms of a man who was not him. Her laugh reached him before anything else did. Soft, unguarded, real. He had not heard that laugh in 14 months. Lord Percival Dawnmore, Duke of Calverton, had walked into Hartwell Manor that evening, fully expecting a routine autumn ball. He had prepared for politics, for whispered deals, for the usual parade of hopeful mothers pushing daughters his way. He had armored himself in indifference, as he always did, but buttoned up tight beneath his charcoal coat and his reputation as a man who felt nothing deeply. He had not prepared for her. He had not prepared for Karina Fairvale. She was supposed to be gone, supposed to be grieving quietly in the countryside, faded and forgotten, exactly where society had left her after the scandal. That was the story everyone told. That was the story he had told himself in the dark hours when he almost reached for pen and paper and then did not. But there she was, alive and luminous and dancing with Lord Ashby Crane, the most charming widower in 3 counties, who had his hand at her waist like it belonged there. Percival's jaw locked. His valet, the ever-watchful Tomkin, appeared at his elbow within seconds, cloth already in hand. "Your Grace, shall I fetch another glass?" Percival said nothing. Across the ballroom, Karina laughed again. Lord Crane leaned close, and she tilted her head back, not with the performative delight of a woman playing at happiness, but with the loose, easy joy of someone who had genuinely moved forward. Something cracked open behind Percival's ribs. He had made his choice 14 months ago. He had stood in a drawing room, looked at 2 sisters, and chosen the one his title demanded. He had told himself it was duty. He had told himself Karina would understand. He had told himself many things, and none of them had ever fully quieted the part of him that knew, bone deep, that he had made the worst mistake of his life. Now she was 10 yards away, glowing under the chandeliers, and the man holding her was smiling like he had already won something Percival had thrown away. The orchestra played on. Percival had come home from 3 years abroad to find 2 deaths waiting for him. His brother Reginald, taken by fever on a military campaign. His father passed away in the spring. 2 losses in less than a year had dropped the full weight of the Calverton dukedom onto his shoulders, and he had returned to an estate in disorder, anxious tenants, circling lawyers, and his mother, the Dowager Duchess Marguerite, sitting very straight in the yellow parlour, holding everything together through will and excellent posture. "You look thin," she had said. "You look tired," he replied. They had embraced briefly, because they were not built for long embraces, and then she had poured tea and explained exactly what the situation required. Money, stability, a duchess. "The Fairvale Sisters of Wiltshire," she had said, setting down her cup. "Philippa, the elder, is accomplished and polished. She would make an excellent duchess in public terms." A pause. "The younger, Karina, is less conventional. She paints. She reads too broadly. She has opinions. She voiced them on the Corn Laws at the Whitmore dinner, in front of Lord Whitmore himself." Despite everything, Percival had almost smiled. 3 weeks later, At the Hartwell Autumn Gathering, he had walked into a room full of people performing for each other, and found Karina Fairvale standing near the fireplace, reading. Book tucked under her arm, hair pinned quickly, ink on the side of her right hand that she had clearly not noticed. She was not angling herself toward the light. She was simply reading, unbothered, in a room that expected otherwise. He had walked toward her before he decided to. "Oh, that edition has a misprint on the 3rd page," he had said. "The translator rendered the Greek incorrectly. The word doesn't endure, it should remain." She had looked up, brown eyes, direct and warm, carrying a flicker of surprise that gave way immediately to curiosity. "You read Theocritus?" "I lived in Athens for a year." "Endure versus remain," she had said, studying the page. "That changes the entire feeling of the line." She looked up again. "Are you going to tell me who you are, or are we pretending introductions don't matter?" Percival Dawnmore, the new Duke of Calverton. No fluster, no performance. "My father has ideas about you that I suspect you already know. This conversation is either very ordinary or very significant, depending on the next half hour." He laughed. Actually laughed, sudden and unguarded. And Karina had watched it happen with an expression that was carefully composed, but could not hide the small, pleased light in her eyes. That was the beginning. 6 weeks followed, that Percival later thought of as the truest of his adult life. Not easy weeks, but honest ones. In Karina's company, the weight of the dukedom became more bearable, as though being genuinely seen by another person made the burden lighter. They were rarely alone. Society did not permit it easily. But there were afternoons on the Hartwell grounds where he fell into step beside her naturally, and evenings where conversation caught them both and pulled them forward while the rest of the table looked on. Philippa Fairvale was everything his mother had described. Gracious, beautiful, socially precise, to warm in the practiced way of someone trained to be warm at the right moments. He respected her entirely. But Philippa looked at him the way people looked at titles, carefully, calculatingly. Karina looked at him the way she looked at books she wanted to understand. Their mother, Henrietta Fairvale, was social arithmetic made flesh. She counted connections like coins, and had decided early that Philippa was the correct choice, and Karina was a complication. She steered Philippa forward at every opportunity, redirected conversations that grew too interesting, and watched her younger daughter with the anxious love of a woman who admired and did not entirely trust what she had raised. Sir Edmund Fairvale, the father, was a compact and quietly shrewd man who welcomed Percival with warmth that stopped short of eagerness. He arranged dinners and walks, and let the matter develop at its own pace with the confidence of someone who had already decided the destination. Among the wider set that autumn, there was also Lord Finchley, an older man with white mutton-chop whiskers and the steady eyes of someone who had outlived enough drama to view it calmly. There was Mrs. Prudence Hartwell, the generous and sharp-eyed hostess who noticed everything in her manner and commented on almost nothing. There was young Mr. Calloway, a neighbour with good humour and no particular ambition, who had made Karina laugh at 2 separate dinners in ways that Percival had catalogued without meaning to. None of them could see what was building. Perhaps his mother could. She had come to him in the library one morning with her hands folded, and her tone very careful. "Well, you are falling in love with the wrong Fairvale," she had said. He had said nothing. "Karina is remarkable," she continued. I believe that genuinely. But she wouldn't become the Duchess of Calverton. She would remain Karina. And right now, the dukedom needs a duchess who can smooth paths and open doors and present the face the world expects. Philippa can do that. Karina cannot. Not because she is lesser, because she is different, and the consequences of choosing differently will fall harder on her than on you. She had left him with that, and it had done its work. Slowly, over 2 weeks of ledgers and lawyers' letters and the grinding reality of what he owed, he had let duty win. He called on Sir Edmund on a Tuesday in late October, the last amber leaves falling outside. He asked for Philippa. Sir Edmund received the request with gracious calm, shook his hand warmly, and said nothing about Karina. The engagement was announced that Friday. Percival had stood in the Fairvale drawing-room with Philippa at his side, receiving congratulations, and he had looked once at Karina, who stood near the window holding a cup of tea she was not drinking. She had already known. Her mother had told her that morning, with the brisk tenderness Henrietta used for news that would hurt. Karina had not made any of the scenes the situation might have justified. She had simply gone still, and then said that she hoped Philippa would be very happy. She said the same to Percival's face that Friday, clearly and without flinching. Then she added, very quietly, so only he could hear, I hope you know what you're doing, Your Grace. He had not answered. There was no answer that wasn't a confession he could not afford. 12 days later, she left for her aunt's house in Northumberland. No scene, no letter. Simply gone, the way sensible people remove themselves from situations that will otherwise require them to perform happiness they do not feel. Percival had not written. The letters he had started sat in a drawer for 3 weeks before he locked it and put the key somewhere inconvenient, which was how he handled things that were both painful and necessary. Now, 14 months later, the drawer was still locked. The wedding was set for spring. Every arrangement had been made, and Karina Fairvale had come back. Across the Hartwell ballroom, the current dance was ending. She stepped back from Ashby Crane's arms, and the room shifted, and in one clean, terrible moment, her eyes found him. But the candlelight and the silk and the gathered crowd fell away. She did not look devastated. That was the thing that struck him hardest. She looked like a woman who had walked through something and came out the other side, carrying herself with quiet authority she hadn't had before. Chin level, eyes clear. The only thing that gave anything away was the half-second pause, the small held breath, before her expression settled into something polite and entirely distant. Then Crane said something beside her and she turned to answer him, and just like that she was in conversation and gone, and Percival was left standing in spilled champagne with the full understanding that she had looked at him and then looked away. She had looked away first. He could not remember the last time anyone had done that. Karina Fairvale had not planned to return to the county in September. The decision had been her aunt's, characteristically direct. Aunt Dorothea Whitfield was 71 years old, sharp as cut glass, and entirely uninterested in the opinion of anyone who had not earned the right to give it. She had watched her niece arrive in Northumberland 14 months earlier, thin and quiet, and carrying herself with the careful stillness of someone who had decided that feeling things too visibly was a luxury she could no longer afford. She had said nothing for 3 days. Then she sat Karina down at the breakfast table and said, "You are not grieving. You are hiding." There is a difference, and I will not host the second one indefinitely." Karina had looked at her eggs. "He chose your sister," Dorothea had continued, or without softness, but also without cruelty. "That is a fact. Facts do not dissolve because we remove ourselves from the rooms that contain them. You will feel this wherever you go, so you may as well feel it somewhere useful." Useful had meant Dorothea's library, her correspondence, her household accounts, and the small but intellectually lively circle of friends she maintained in the Northumberland countryside. It had meant dinner conversations that required actual thinking, walks that covered real ground, and the gradual, unglamorous process of a young woman rebuilding her own sense of what she was worth outside of the context of a man who had not chosen her. It had taken most of those 14 months. It had not been romantic or swift, or accompanied by any dramatic revelation. It had simply been work, the patient daily work of becoming someone who did not need the story to end differently in order to stand upright. By the time Dorothea said, in late August, "You should go back. The county needs to see you well, and you need to see yourself well in it," Karina had felt, for the first time, that returning was something she could do, rather than something that would undo her. She had returned in September. The county had received her with the mixture of warmth and veiled curiosity that greeted anyone returning from a long absence under slightly complicated circumstances. Mrs. Hartwell had called within the first week and been so genuinely pleased to see her that Karina had felt the tightness in her chest loosen a degree. Lord Finchley had tipped his hat at her in the village and said she looked very well, which from Finchley was practically an oration. Her sister Philippa had come to call on the second week, alone, without their mother, which told Karina that the visit was Philippa's own idea. They had sat in the front parlour of Fairvale House, with tea between them and the particular tension of two women who love each other and have been made to occupy opposite sides of something neither of them designed. "You look wonderful," Philippa had said, and meant it, with the slight complexity of someone who had worried and is relieved, and also cannot entirely untangle the relief from guilt. "I am well," Karina had said, and had also meant it, which she couldn't have said at any point in the preceding 14 months. They talked for an hour. Not about Percival, not about the engagement, not about the wedding that was being planned for spring, about Philippa's adjustments to the Calverton household, about the London townhouse, about the surprisingly good library, about a particular disagreement with the head housekeeper over the arrangement of the East Wing. Ordinary things. Real things. By the time Philippa left, something between them had settled, not resolved completely, because some things do not resolve completely, but settled enough to breathe around. Lady Fairvale had been less subtle. Her mother had appeared the following day, with a look that managed to express relief, satisfaction, continued anxiety, and preemptive warning all at once. "You are back," she had said, as though confirming a shipment. "Good, hold your head up, or you were never to blame, and everyone sensible knows it." It was the closest her mother had ever come to an apology, and Karina had accepted it for exactly what it was. Lord Ashby Crane had arrived in the county 6 weeks after her return, brought by a standing invitation from Mr. Calloway, whose family estate bordered the Crane property in Gloucestershire. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with an open face, and the unhurried manner of someone who had been through enough difficulty to stop pretending that pretense was worth the effort. His wife had died 2 years earlier. He did not perform grief, and he did not perform recovery. He was simply a man who had lost something significant and had continued living, which Karina found she had more to say to than she would have expected. But their first real conversation had been at a small dinner at the Calloway house, where they had ended up at the same end of the table, discussing, of all things, the management of difficult correspondence. "I have a system," Crane had said. "Letters I don't want to answer go in a box on the left side of my desk. Letters I intend to answer but keep postponing go in a box on the right. Every Sunday I open both boxes and feel terrible about myself for 15 minutes, and then close them again." Karina had laughed, genuinely and without strategy. "That is either very honest or a complete failure of organization." "Both," he had said pleasantly. "I find honesty and organizational failure often travel together." He had called at Fairvale House the following week, then again the week after. He had taken her riding twice, but attended the same small evening gathering at the Finchley house, and appeared at the Hartwell Autumn Ball that evening, with the comfortable ease of someone who had established a presence and did not feel the need to announce it. He had not said anything direct. He was not a man who moved in straight lines. But there was something in his attention, consistent and genuine, and entirely without pressure, that Karina found she did not want to redirect. She was not in love with him. She was not ready for that. And she knew it, and she believed Crane knew it too, which was perhaps why his company felt safe rather than complicated. He was someone to talk to, someone who laughed at her jokes and disagreed with her opinions and treated her intelligence as a feature rather than an inconvenience. It was enough, for now. It was more than enough. She had not expected Percival to be at the Hartwell ball. She had known, at an abstract level, that he still moved in the same social world, that the county was not so large that their circles would never overlap. But she had not thought it would be tonight, so soon after her return, before she had fully rehearsed what composed indifference looked like from the inside rather than just the outside. When his eyes had found hers across the ballroom, the first thing she had felt was the old thing, the specific and useless ache of a feeling she had spent 14 months dismantling piece by piece. It had arrived in a fraction of a second before her mind could intervene, like a reflex. Then her mind intervened. She had breathed. She had let her expression settle. She had turned to Crane and answered whatever he had said, and she had meant every word of the answer, because she was there, in that room, in her own skin, and Percival Dawnmore had made his choice 14 months ago, and she had survived it. She was more than surviving now, what she had not expected, and what she carried quietly with her for the rest of that evening was the look on his face in that half-second before she turned away. She had not been meant to see it clearly enough to read, but she had 14 months of understanding that particular face and what she had seen in it, just for a moment, was not the smooth, controlled composure of the Duke of Calverton. It was something raw, something that looked, painfully and inconveniently, like a man who had just understood something too late. She did not intend to make anything of it. She intended to finish the evening well, to ride home with her chin up, and to sleep without dreaming about things that were already decided. She managed 2 out of 3. The morning after the Hartwell ball, Percival didn't go riding. He always went riding in the mornings. It was one of the fixed points of his day, the hour before the letters and the appointments and the 1,000 small demands of the dukedom arrived to claim him. Tomkin had the horse ready at 7 as usual, and waited 20 minutes before quietly leading it back to the stable without comment. Percival was in the library. He had been there since before 6. He was not reading. He was sitting in the chair nearest the window with a cup of cold tea on the table beside him, and the locked drawer of his desk visible from where he sat, which he was aware of and did not address. What he was doing was thinking, with the focused unpleasantness of a man who has been avoiding a particular thought for 14 months and has now run out of room to keep avoiding it. The thought was this. He had chosen duty over Karina because he had believed she would recover, and he would not be the cause of lasting harm. He had told himself she was strong, and she would find her footing, and life would carry her forward as it carried capable people forward. He had believed, at some deep and convenient level, that choosing duty meant no one truly got hurt, that the hurt was temporary, that time would dissolve it. What he had seen last night was not a woman who had been dissolved by time. It was a woman who had been refined by it. Karina had come back to the county not as a diminished version of herself, but as a fuller one, the steadier and warmer, and in possession of something he could only describe as earned confidence. She had not needed rescuing. She had not needed his guilt or his belated recognition. She had simply gotten on with the business of becoming more entirely herself, and she had done it without him, and the part of him that had perhaps held on to some vague notion that he remained significant to her story had been quietly and thoroughly corrected. That was what looking away had meant. He was not the center of her difficulty anymore. He was simply someone she had once known who had made a painful choice and whom she was now capable of encountering at a ball without falling apart. He should have been relieved by that. He understood, intellectually, that he should have been relieved. He was not relieved. There was a knock at the library door, and his estate steward, Mr. Bancroft, entered with the weekly report. Bancroft was a thin, precise man of about 40, efficient and loyal, who had served the estate since before Reginald's death and had quietly become indispensable in the disorder that followed. He set the report on the desk and began his summary with the measured pace of someone who had learned that the Duke preferred information delivered without preamble. Percival listened. He asked the necessary questions. He made 2 decisions about the northern field drainage and one about the tenants in the eastern cottages who had written for the 3rd time about the roof. He was entirely present for all of it, or because he had not survived 3 years of diplomatic work abroad and 14 months as a duke by being unable to function in the presence of personal discomfort. But when Bancroft withdrew, the quiet came back, and with it, the thought. Lord Crane. Ashby Crane, whom Percival had known at Oxford as a second year when Percival was a first, easy-tempered and well-liked, and the sort of man who made other men feel they had known him longer than they had. Crane had written that letter 18 months ago, describing a remarkable young woman in Northumberland, and Percival had read it 3 times and locked it in a drawer, and apparently Crane had not forgotten her either. 6 weeks of attentiveness, the same length as that first autumn. Percival was aware that this parallel was not meaningful. He was aware that he had no rights over Karina Fairvale's happiness, no claim on her future, no standing to feel anything about who stood beside her at a ball. He was engaged to her sister. He was going to marry her sister in the spring. Everything was arranged. He was also aware that awareness and feeling are entirely different countries, and that knowing the right thing and experiencing it as right are separated by a distance that cannot always be crossed by will alone. He had to see her again, not for any reason that he could justify to himself or anyone else, simply because there was something unfinished between them that the ballroom had cracked open, and that he didn't believe he could board back up with another year of locked drawers and early mornings. The opportunity arrived sooner than he expected. Mrs. de Hartwell was hosting a smaller afternoon gathering 3 days later, a musical afternoon, the kind of event that drew 20 or 30 guests rather than 300. When the invitation arrived, Percival accepted it, which Tomkin noted without expression. He arrived deliberately late, which meant the guests were already arranged in the music room when he entered, and he could see the room before committing himself to any particular position in it. Karina was there, seated near the window with Mrs. Finchley on one side and a young woman he did not recognize on the other. Crane was not present. That fact settled something in Percival's chest with a quiet click that he neither examined nor welcomed. He took a seat toward the back and let the first 2 performances pass without moving. Miss Alderton played the piano with competent enthusiasm. Mr. Devereux, a young man lately arrived from the north with artistic ambitions and excellent hair, sang a French melody that drew appreciative murmurs from the assembled guests and an expression of genuine pleasure from Karina that Percival registered and filed and did not react to visibly. During the interval, when the guests rose and began moving toward the refreshment table and each other, he crossed the room. She saw him coming. Of course she did. There was no natural way for him to approach her in a room this size that would have allowed genuine surprise. She watched him cross the last few feet, and she did not look away this time, which he understood was a different kind of composure from the ballroom. That had been instinct. This was a choice. "Miss Fairvale," he said. "Your Grace," she said. 3 days since the ball, and this was the first time they had exchanged words in 14 months. They were the most ordinary words in the English language, and they sat between them like stones in a river. "You are well," he said. It was not a question. "I am," she said. "And you?" "Well enough." A pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to in order to communicate that ordinary conversation was going to require some effort from both of them. "I did not know you were back in the county," he said, "until the ball." "I returned in September," she said pleasantly. "Mrs. Hartwell has been very kind. The county has been welcoming." "I am glad," he said, and meant it, which made saying it harder rather than easier. She looked at him with the clear brown eyes he had not stopped seeing in 14 months of deliberate not seeing, and he could read nothing certain in them, which was new. He had once been able to read her easily, not because she was simple, but because she had not hidden herself from him. She was hiding now, not badly, not unkindly, but the window was no longer open. He had closed it. He understood that. He had no right to be surprised by it. "Your engagement," she said, in the same pleasant tone, "is going well, I hope." Philippa mentioned the London arrangements. "Yes," he said. "Spring." "She is very happy," Karina said. "I think she will manage Calverton beautifully." She said it without any detectable edge, and that was somehow worse than an edge would have been, because it meant she had genuinely processed it. I genuinely moved it into the category of facts she could discuss without bleeding. "Karina," he said, and stopped. Something shifted in her face, very small, at the use of her name. Not softening exactly, more like a brief acknowledgement that a boundary had been tested. "Your Grace," she said, gently but clearly. The room moved around them. Mrs. Hartwell was laughing with the Aldertons. Mr. Devereux was being complimented elaborately by two women near the fireplace. The ordinary texture of an afternoon gathering continued without interest in the two people standing near the window. "I'm glad you are well," Percival said. He made himself mean only what the word said, and nothing more. "Thank you," she said. "I worked quite hard at it." It was the most direct thing she had said to him, and it landed exactly as she had intended it to, with the gentle precision of someone who has learned to say true things without cruelty. She was not attacking him. She was simply telling him the cost, clearly and without drama, and trusting him to understand it. He did understand it. That was the difficulty. He had always understood her. "I should return to Mrs. Finchley," she said, already beginning to move. She was in the middle of telling me about her granddaughter. "Of course," he said. She walked back across the room with the quiet steadiness that was entirely hers, and Percival stood at the window and watched her return to her seat and lean in toward Mrs. Finchley with genuine interest in whatever the older woman had been saying. She had not looked back. He was starting to understand that she was not going to. And he was starting to understand, with the slow and sickening clarity of a man who has made an irreversible decision and is only now seeing its full dimension, that the version of himself that had locked that drawer and put away the key had not been choosing duty. He had been choosing fear. The afternoon continued. The music resumed. Percival sat in his chair near the back of the room and listened to a young woman play the harp with more feeling than technique, and thought about the difference between duty and fear, and whether, at this particular point in his life, the distinction still mattered. He was not certain it did. He was not certain it didn't. What he was certain of, for the first time in 14 months, was that the locked drawer and the arranged wedding and the careful indifference had not resolved anything. They had only delayed it. And delays, as any man of business knew, accumulated interest. Lord Ashby Crane arrived at the Calloway estate on a Thursday morning with mud on his boots and a letter in his coat pocket that he had written and rewritten 4 times before deciding the 5th version was honest enough to keep. He had not intended to fall for Karina Fairvale. He had come to the county for a quiet autumn, to ride Calloway's good horses and eat Calloway's excellent cook's food and rest from the particular exhaustion of being a widower in London, where everyone either pitied you or tried to fix you with cheerful urgency. He had wanted neither pity nor fixing. He had wanted quiet. Then he had sat beside Karina at a dinner table, and she had said something so precisely true and so unexpectedly funny in the same breath that he had laughed before he could decide whether to, and everything after that had been somewhat inevitable. He liked her mind first. That was the honest order of it. He liked that she disagreed with him without performing disagreement, that she listened with the full attention of someone who actually intended to update her thinking if the argument was good enough, that she found the same things absurd that he found absurd and could articulate why without needing him to agree first. He liked that she had been through something difficult and had not let it make her brittle or careful or closed. She was open in the way that only people who have chosen openness after having good reason to close themselves can be. The feeling came after the liking, which in Crane's experience was the correct order and the more durable one. He had not said anything directly yet because he was not a man who spoke before he was certain, and he had wanted to be certain before he asked anything of her. He was also aware, without either of them ever having discussed it, that there was something in her history that required patience. Not the dramatic, romantic patience of a man waiting for a woman to stop thinking about another man. Simply the ordinary human patience of allowing someone to arrive at their own readiness without pressure. But the ball had clarified something for him. He had watched Percival Dawnmore cross the ballroom toward Karina at the musical afternoon, and had heard about it from Mr. Calloway's wife, Clara, who had not been present, but had heard from someone who was. He had sat with that information for 2 days, and had taken it out, and examined it from several angles, and had arrived at a conclusion. He was not going to wait indefinitely. Not because he was threatened by Dawnmore exactly. The man was engaged to Karina's sister, and whatever had once existed between them was Karina's past, and not his business to excavate. But because waiting, in Crane's experience, had a way of communicating the wrong thing. He did not want Karina to interpret his patience as indifference. He did not want her to think she was filling time for him. She was not filling time for him. He rode to Fairvale House that Thursday afternoon, was admitted by the housekeeper, and found Karina in the back sitting room, working on a painting that was large and unhurried, and clearly not intended for display at any gathering where the subjects might recognize themselves. She set down her brush without embarrassment when he came in and pushed a curl off her forehead with the back of her wrist, leaving a faint streak of ochre near her hairline. "You have paint on your face," he said. "I frequently do," she said. "Sit down. Mrs. Holt will bring tea." He sat. She rinsed her brush and set it across the jar with the automatic tidiness of long habit, and then sat across from him with her hands folded and her eyes direct, in the way she had of giving her full attention without making it feel like an interrogation. "You look like you have something to say," she said. "I do," he said. "Yet then say it." He appreciated that about her. She did not make people circle their own honesty. "I find that I am considerably more interested in your company than in the company of anyone else in this county," he said. "Possibly considerably more than in the company of anyone else I have met in some years. I wanted you to know that clearly, rather than have you deduce it gradually, because I think you deserve clarity." She looked at him steadily, not with the flutter of someone receiving unexpected news, but with the attentive quiet of someone taking a statement seriously. "Ashby," she said, and the use of his given name was itself a small thing that was not small. "I want to be honest with you." "Please," he said. "I have not fully arrived yet," she said carefully. "I don't mean that I am pining for something past. I am not. I mean that I am still in the process of knowing what I want, which is different, and I do not think it would be fair to receive what you've just said and respond with the same certainty, because I cannot yet. I'm not asking for certainty," he said. "I am asking for honesty, which you have just given me. That is sufficient for now." Something in her expression shifted, the faint loosening of a tension she had perhaps not known she was holding. "You are a very reasonable man," she said. "I've been called worse." The tea arrived. They drank it in the comfortable way of people who have passed some small but genuine test together and are the better for it. They talked about the painting, about a book she had recently finished, about his estate in Gloucestershire, and the renovations he had been putting off for 2 years. Or Clara Calloway called in the afternoon and found them still talking and stayed for another hour, and by the time Crane rode back to the Calloway estate in the early evening, the letter in his coat pocket felt less necessary. He had said the true thing. She had received it honestly. That was enough to build on. What neither of them knew was that the conversation had been partially overheard. Not by design. Lady Fairvale had arrived at Fairvale House mid-afternoon, intending to call on Karina, and had been shown to the front parlour by a maid who had not realized the sitting room was occupied. She had heard enough through the partially open corridor door to understand the essential shape of what had passed between them, and she had sat in the front parlour for 10 minutes afterward, processing it with the particular intensity of a woman who loves her daughter and has also spent considerable energy managing her daughter's social situation. When Crane's horse had gone, and Clara Calloway had departed, and Karina came to the front parlour to find her mother, the expression on Henrietta Fairvale's face was complicated. It was the face of a woman who had wanted one thing for a long time, and was beginning, slowly and with some resistance, to want something different. "Lord Crane seems a very sincere man," she said. Karina studied her mother. "He is. He has a good estate," Henrietta said. "Respectable income, sound reputation. His late wife spoke very well of him to anyone who asked." She paused. "He looks at you like you are the most interesting person in the room." "Mother," Karina said, with the patient firmness of long practice. "I am simply observing," Henrietta said, with the dignity of a woman who has decided to retire from interference and wishes to be acknowledged for the effort. "I am not advising. I am simply saying that a man who looks at you like that is not common." Karina said nothing, which her mother correctly read as agreement. Sir Edmund, who had been reading in his study and had noticed the visiting horse and the extended tea and his wife's particular expression at dinner, said nothing at all that evening. He simply passed the bread to Karina with the small extra warmth that was his version of saying, quietly and without pressure, that he was paying attention and that whatever she decided, it was on her side. That night, in her room, Karina sat at the window and looked at the dark garden and thought about Crane's honesty and her own, and the difference between where she had been 14 months ago and where she was now. She thought about the word arrived, which she had used herself, and what it meant to be still in the process of something rather than finished with it. She thought, briefly and without the old ache, about the ballroom, about Percival's face in that half-second, about the musical afternoon and the use of her first name that she had redirected firmly and without cruelty. That chapter was closed, not with bitterness, simply closed, the way you close a book you have finished and understood and do not need to open again. What was open was something new, and something that had not been handed to her by circumstance or obligation or the machinery of social arrangement. Something she was choosing, slowly and with her eyes open and her full intelligence engaged. She was not ready to name it yet, but she was no longer afraid of it either. The wedding preparations for the Duke of Calverton and Miss Philippa Fairvale arrived in November with the momentum of something that had been building for 14 months and now required only completion. The modiste came from London. The guest list was finalized. The Calverton townhouse received new furnishings in the east wing that Philippa had chosen with the confident taste of a woman who had been preparing for exactly this role most of her adult life. The announcement ran in the society papers with the appropriate dignity, and congratulations arrived from the expected quarters in the expected volume. Philippa moved through all of it with grace. She was good at this. She had always been good at this, and watching her manage the details of her own wedding with the efficient warmth that was characteristic of her, Percival felt, genuinely and without complication, that she deserved better than a man whose heart was conducting a separate argument in a locked room. He had not spoken to Karina again since the musical afternoon. He had not attended the Finchley dinner, where he knew she would be present, sending his apologies with the excuse of estate business that was partially true. He had not ridden past Fairvale House. He had done, in short, everything that a man in his position ought to do, which was to close the distance and apply himself to the life he had chosen. He was not succeeding entirely, but he was trying, which he told himself had to count for something. It was Tomkin who brought the news on a grey Wednesday morning in November. With the careful neutrality he reserved for information he suspected would not be well received. He had heard it from the Calloway coachman, who had mentioned it to the Calverton stablemaster, who had mentioned it at breakfast. Lord Crane had called formally at Fairvale House, not a social call, a formal one, received by Sir Edmund in the study, lasting the better part of an hour, after which Sir Edmund had been seen shaking Crane's hand at the door with an expression that the Calloway coachman described as very pleased indeed. Percival received this information at his desk. He set down his pen. He did not speak for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you, Tomkin," and picked his pen back up. He did not write anything with it for several minutes. He was not surprised. He had seen it at the ball, had understood it at the musical afternoon, or had felt it with the particular helpless clarity of a man watching something develop that he has no right to prevent. Crane was calling formally. Sir Edmund was pleased. The shape of the thing was clear. What surprised him was the feeling, which was not the sharp jealousy he might have anticipated, but something more complicated and more honest. It was a loss. The pure and simple understanding of what he had walked away from, made concrete now by the fact that someone else was walking toward it and being welcomed. He had told himself 14 months ago that duty required the choice he made. He had believed it. He still believed, in the architectural sense, that the argument was structurally sound. The dukedom had needed what Philippa offered. His mother had been correct in her assessment. What he had not accounted for, with sufficient seriousness, was the cost. Not the cost to himself, which he had been willing to bear. The cost to Karina, who had removed herself quietly to Northumberland and rebuilt herself into someone even more wholly herself, and was now in the natural course of living forward, finding someone who recognized what she was worth. He had not caused lasting harm. He had told himself he would not, and he had been right, technically. She was not broken. She was not diminished. She was simply no longer his, and she was going to belong, in whatever way she chose, to a man who had looked at her clearly and not hesitated. Percival put down his pen and went to the window, and looked at the November garden, the bare trees and the grey sky, and felt the full weight of a decision he had made with his head when his heart had known better. Or the wedding was in spring. He was going to do the right thing. He was going to marry Philippa and be a good husband and manage the dukedom and do the 100 things that required doing. And he was going to do them well, because that was who he was and who he had always been. But first he was going to stand at this window for a few more minutes and allow himself to know, without excuse or revision, what he had lost and why. There were footsteps in the corridor. Then a knock and the door opened, and Philippa herself came in, slightly flushed from the cold, hat still on, clearly just arrived from somewhere. She stopped when she saw his expression, which must have been, for once, less controlled than usual. "Percival," she said, and with the careful attentiveness of an intelligent woman who has noticed something and is deciding how to address it directly. "Philippa," he wailed. He pulled himself back to the surface. "I didn't know you were coming today." "I wanted to show you the final fabric samples," she said, still watching him. She came further into the room and set a wrapped package on the desk, but she did not open it immediately. She stood looking at him with the steady brown eyes that were her mother's eyes, darker than Karina's, more contained, and she said, "Are you all right?" "Perfectly," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in a tone that was neither accusing nor fragile, but simply direct, "I heard about Lord Crane's call at Fairvale House this morning." He met her eyes. "Philippa, I am not asking you anything," she said calmly. "I am not making an accusation. I am simply telling you that I am aware of it, and that I think it is good news." She held his gaze steadily. "My sister deserves someone who chooses her first." The sentence landed in the room with the quiet force of something true, said by someone who had been thinking it for a long time and had finally decided that saying it was more useful than not. Percival said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would not open a door he had committed to keeping closed. Philippa opened the fabric package and began describing the differences between the two samples with the same composed efficiency she brought to everything, and Percival stood beside her and looked at the fabrics and said the appropriate things, and the room continued, and the morning continued, and the arrangements continued. But something had shifted between them, small and irreversible. The way a key turned in a lock changes the lock even after the key is removed. Philippa had said a true thing. She had said it without cruelty and without collapse, and he had heard it, and they both knew he had heard it. And now it was in the room with them, quiet and permanent. She left an hour later with a warmth that was genuine and a steadiness that he respected more in that moment than he had at any point in their engagement. He went back to the window, across the county, in the back sitting room at Fairvale House, with ochre on her fingers and a half-finished painting on the easel. Karina Fairvale was listening to her father describe Lord Crane's formal call with the particular, careful happiness of a man who wants good things for his daughter, and is beginning to believe they are actually arriving. She had asked 3 questions. All of them are practical. Then she nodded, slowly, and looked at her painting for a moment. And then she smiled. Not the performed smile of a woman who has decided to be pleased. The unguarded, loose, honest smile of someone who feels something real and is not afraid of it. Sir Edmund had seen it and said nothing, because some things are better honoured with silence. Outside, the November sky was still grey, but inside, in that small room, with the paint smell and the afternoon light, and a father watching his younger daughter come back fully to herself, something had quietly, irreversibly begun. December arrived in the county with the first real frost, the kind that turned the morning fields white and made the air taste clean and sharp. Fairvale House sat quietly in it, smoke rising from the chimneys, the front garden glittering faintly in the early light, and inside, in the back sitting room, Karina Fairvale was finishing the large painting she had started in October. It was a painting of a woman standing at a window, not looking out, simply standing, facing the glass, with her reflection visible and her hands loose at her sides. The woman in the painting didn't look sad. She did not look triumphant. She looked like someone who had arrived somewhere after a long walk and was taking a moment to acknowledge the distance covered. Karina stepped back and looked at it for a long time. Then she cleaned her brushes, wiped her hands, and went downstairs for breakfast. Lord Crane was calling that afternoon. He had been calling regularly since his formal visit with Sir Edmund, and the calls had changed in quality without changing in manner. He was still the same, unhurried, honest, quietly funny man he had always been in her company. But there was something more settled in them now, a shared understanding that they were no longer simply enjoying each other's company in the open-ended way of two people who haven't yet decided anything. They had both decided something. They had not yet said so formally, but the decision was present in every conversation, patient and warm, waiting to be named. She was ready to name it. She had known for about 2 weeks, in the way you know things that have been true for longer than you have allowed yourself to acknowledge them. It had not arrived as a revelation. It had arrived the way the frost had arrived, gradually, quietly, until one morning she had looked out the window, and it was simply there, covering everything, and it felt natural, rather than surprising. She was not in love with Crane the way she had once felt the beginning of something with Percival, that sharp and disorienting pull toward a person who understood her almost before she had finished a sentence. What she felt for Crane was different in kind, and not lesser in volume. It was warmer, more deliberate, built on actual knowledge of an actual person, rather than on the intoxicating early light that made everything look like what you most wanted it to be. She knew his faults now. He was disorganized in the way he had confessed at that first dinner, genuinely and committedly disorganized, with the 2 boxes on his desk and the Sunday guilt and no apparent intention of improving. He was sometimes too accommodating with people who did not deserve accommodation, keeping peace at the cost of the honesty in ways that occasionally frustrated her. He fell asleep in chairs after large dinners and was embarrassed about it in an endearing way. He had very strong opinions about horses that occasionally crossed the border into the unreasonable. She knew all of this. She liked him anyway, which was the more durable thing. She also knew that he had written to her twice from Gloucestershire during a brief visit to his estate in November, letters that were warm and funny and contained in their margins small sketches of things he had seen that reminded him of things she had said, a sketch of a particular tree, a sketch of a dog that had apparently tried to eat his boot, a sketch of a window that he had labelled in small, neat letters, better than the view from the other side. She had kept both letters in the drawer of her writing desk and had not locked the drawer. She had not locked the drawer. That, more than anything, told her what she needed to know about where she had arrived. Crane came at 3 p.m, admitted by Mrs. Holt with the ease of someone who had become a familiar and welcome presence in the house. He came into the sitting room where Karina was waiting with tea already poured, and he stopped in the doorway when he saw the finished painting on the easel. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and stood in front of it properly, the way he looked at things he wanted to understand with his full attention and no performance of appreciation. "The reflection is different from the woman," he said. "Yes," she said. "The reflection is looking out," he said. "The woman is looking at the reflection." "Yes." He turned to look at her, with the direct, warm eyes that never tried to be more than they were. "That's a very honest painting, Karina." "I am a very honest painter," she said. He smiled. It was the smile she had come to think of as his real one. Not the sociable warmth he offered the world generally, but the specific, slightly unguarded version that arrived when something genuinely pleased him. He came and sat in the chair across from her, and accepted the tea she held out, and they sat in the comfortable quiet that had become one of her favorite things about his company. Then he said, "I want to ask you something." "Then ask it," she said. He set down his cup. He did not perform nervousness, and he did not perform confidence. He simply looked at her with the honesty that was his most consistent quality, and said, "I would like to marry you, if you are willing." Not because the arrangement suits anyone's requirements, or because the timing is convenient, or because it is the logical conclusion of the past few months. Because I find you extraordinary, and I want the rest of my life to include you in it as fully as possible. That is the entire reason, and there is no other. The room was quiet. The frost outside had softened through the afternoon into something gentler, and the light through the sitting-room windows was the particular pale gold of a December afternoon that was trying its best. Karina looked at him. She thought about a woman at a window with her hands loose at her sides. She thought about locked drawers and unlocked ones. She thought about the difference between a feeling that arrived like a storm and one that arrived like a season, gradual and total and real. "Yes," she said. "Ashby, yes." He exhaled quietly, and she realized he had been more uncertain than he had shown, which she found she loved about him, that the steadiness was real, and the vulnerability beneath it was also real, and he did not pretend otherwise. He reached across and took her hand, and she let him, and they sat like that for a moment in the pale December light, with the honest painting on the easel behind them, and the tea going slightly cold between them. Mrs. Holt, who had been passing the corridor door with unnecessary frequency for the past 20 minutes, had heard the quality of the silence change, and went to find Sir Edmund with a speed that was inconsistent with her usual dignity. Sir Edmund came to the sitting-room doorway, took one look at his daughter's face, and felt something settle in his chest that had been unsettled for a long time. He shook Crane's hand with both of his. "You will take care of her," he said. It was not a question. "I will spend considerable effort trying," Crane said. "She is better at most things than I am, which will keep me honest." Sir Edmund laughed, the full and genuine laugh of a man who is genuinely happy, and Karina stood and embraced her father, and felt the warmth of his arms around her, and did not cry, because she was not sad, not even in the bitter-sweet way she might have expected. She was simply glad, deeply, quietly, entirely glad. But Lady Fairvale received the news that evening with an expression that passed through several stages rapidly before arriving at tearful satisfaction. She embraced Crane with a warmth that visibly surprised him, and then spent 15 minutes asking very precise questions about the Gloucestershire estate that he answered with patient good humour. By the time she had satisfied herself on the matters of income, household size, and proximity to a good modista, she had declared the match excellent, and retired to write 3 letters to friends in other counties with the urgency of a woman who has information and intends to share it promptly. Mr. Calloway and Clara came to dinner 2 days later, and Clara wept happy tears and held Karina's hands and said she had known from the Calloway dinner that first evening, absolutely known. And Karina said she had known nothing at the Calloway dinner except that he was funny about correspondence, and Clara said that was exactly when she had known. The news travelled through the county with the speed that good news travels when it involves people that people genuinely like. Mrs. Hartwell declared herself delighted and immediately began thinking about a celebratory evening at Hartwell Manor. Lord Finchley nodded when he heard it, and said simply that it was right, which was all he ever said about anything he approved of, and which meant more than a longer statement would have. Aunt Dorothea received the letter in Northumberland, and wrote back a single paragraph that contained more warmth than she had expressed in the entire 14 months of Karina's residence in her house. She said that she was not surprised, or that Karina had arrived in her home as a half-finished thing and had left it complete, and that any man worth marrying would have been able to see that and responded accordingly. She also said the Gloucestershire weather was reportedly wet, and Karina should bring good boots. Karina read the letter 3 times and smiled each time. Across the county, at Calverton, the news arrived via the particular social channels through which all county news eventually arrived at large estates. Percival heard it from his mother, who came to the library on a Friday morning and told him directly, as she did everything, without excessive cushioning. "Lord Crane has proposed to Karina Fairvale," she said. "She has accepted. Sir Edmund is very pleased." Percival was at his desk. He did not look up immediately. He finished the sentence he was writing, which was about drainage easements, and had nothing to do with anything, and then he set down his pen and looked at his mother. She was watching him with the eyes that had always seen him too clearly for comfort. She did not look triumphant. She did not look sorry. She looked like a woman who loves her son and knows him well enough to understand that the correct thing to offer at this particular moment is neither consolation nor reminder. "Good," he said. It was the truest thing he had said in weeks. Not because it did not cost him. It cost him considerably, but because it was good, genuinely and completely good, and he was capable of knowing that even while it hurt, which was perhaps the only form of growth that mattered. His mother sat down and poured tea with the quiet efficiency of long practice. "Philippa's final fitting is next Thursday," she said, moving forward because forward was the only useful direction. "The florist requires a decision on the arrangements by the end of the month." "I'll see to it," he said. She nodded. She handed him his cup. She did not say anything else about Karina or Crane or the cost of choices made in difficult autumns. She had said what needed to be said 14 months ago, and she was not a woman who repeated herself. But before she rose to leave, she rested her hand briefly on his shoulder, just for a moment, in the way she had not done since he was a boy. He did not react visibly. He simply felt it, the weight of it, warm and steady and without words. Then she was gone, and the library was quiet, and the December frost pressed softly at the windows. He sat for a long time. Or he thought about a first evening at a Hartwell party, and a woman reading at a fireplace with ink on her hand. He thought about 6 weeks of the truest conversation he had ever had. He thought about a glass shattering on marble, and a woman who had looked at him and then looked away and had been right too. He thought about Crane's hand at her waist in the ballroom, and then he thought about Crane's hand at her waist for the rest of her life, steady and chosen and freely given. He thought about the word remain, not endure, remain. He hoped she would remain exactly as she was, the ink and the opinions and the paintings that told the truth. He hoped Crane understood what he had been given and spent his life being grateful for it. He suspected he would. That was the particular quality of the man, or that he understood the value of things and did not pretend otherwise. Percival picked up his pen. He had a letter to write about drainage easements, and a wedding to prepare for, and a dukedom to run, and a life that was, by any reasonable measure, full of purpose and substance, and the kind of meaning that came from doing difficult things with integrity. It was enough. It was genuinely enough. He began to write. Across the county, in the back sitting room of Fairvale House, Karina Fairvale was starting a new painting. She had cleaned the easel and set a fresh canvas on it, and was standing before it with a brush in her hand and no plan yet, which was how she always began the things that turned out best. The afternoon light came through the window, pale gold and honest, and fell across the canvas and across her hands, and across the small ink mark on the side of her right hand that she had not noticed. She pressed the brush to the canvas and began. She did not look back. She did not need to.